Greetings, comrades. Let's go ahead and finish chapter 15 of Capital. We are still talking about machinery and modern industry, and in section 9 of chapter 15, we're talking about quote-unquote worker protections, okay? Some of these laws that have been passed to sort of protect the workers to a small extent. And really, he talks about how factory legislation is important. It's an important aspect of capitalism. The labor force looks at it as helping themselves, and it does. He talks about the mills ripping limbs from torsos of these people, specifically children working in the factories. And so we put this legislation in place to protect the workers, but really it's protecting them just so that they can live long enough to make more workers. That's literally it. And that's why these laws were even really able to be passed, why the bourgeoisie, by the capitalists, even allowed some of these protections to come into place, is because they needed them as well so that they could have a continuing workforce. Here is where some education is introduced to working class children. These kids were aging out of the factories around 17 when they got too big to manipulate the tiny little gadgets that they needed children's hands for. So when they aged out at 17, they couldn't get work and they turned to a life of crime. So some of this education was introduced to where kids would do like a half a day of school and then a half a day of work. And that was the balance that they found. There's a quote here that I wanted to read. We have seen how this absolute contradiction between the technical necessities of modern industry and the social character inherent in its capitalistic form dispels all fixity and security in the situation of the laborer, how it constantly threatens by taking away the instruments of labor to snatch from his hands his means of subsistence, and by suppressing his detail function to make him superfluous. So there's always this threat of your job being taken away, of being given to the machine, to a child. And so that keeps us working for scraps, right? This leads into section 10, the last bit of chapter 15, where we're talking about machinery in agriculture. And very similar to the way machinery came into the factories, we brought it into food production as well. It revolutionized the agricultural production. He calls it scientific agriculture. And there were now more people living in the cities than those working on, on the fields, in the fields, on the farms. And so this also makes it a difficult situation. This is what I wanted to read. Moreover, all progress in capitalistic agriculture is a progress of the art, not only of robbing the laborer, but of robbing the soil. All progress in increasing the fertility of the soil for a given time is a progress towards ruining the lasting sources of that fertility. The more a country starts its development on the foundation of modern industry, like the United States, for example, the more rapid is this process of destruction. And so we see that today in agriculture, the way these large corporate landowners, especially in the US, these big corporate farms, the way the soil is often being ruined. We're not doing things the old way, the way that the natives worked this land and kept it sustainable, planting things that complement each other, things that replace the nitrates in the soil. We just absolutely destroy this land to build cash crops, to grow cash crops. The U.S. produces a shit ton of corn that we feed to animals, rather than things that actually sustain, like, humanity. So, finished chapter 15, finally. Cheers.